Wow, navigating e-commerce these days, it's a bit of a wild ride, isn't it?
It sure is.
Like, buckle up, everybody,
Yeah.
because we're diving straight into the tariff tornado that spun up in April with the Liberation Day campaign.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah.
For those keeping track at home, that meant a 10% tariff on almost everything coming into the U.S.,
Right.
a whopping 145% tariff on Chinese imports,
Oof.
25% on any cars or car parts from overseas.
Yikes.
And to really ice the cake, they ended that de minimis exemption for shipments under $800 from China and Hong Kong as of May 2nd, 2025.
Yeah, so even those smaller packages are getting hit with duties now.
Exactly. And as you might expect, China wasn't just going to sit there.
Right.
They fired back with an 84% tariff on U.S. goods.
Tit for tat.
Yeah, basically global trade war.
Feels like the ground shifted under our feet with all of this.
It did.
But then there was a little bit of a pause, right?
That's right. On April 9th, they announced a 90-day suspension of these new tariffs for over 75 countries. Countries that are, negotiating and haven't retaliated.
So a little bit of breathing room.
Exactly. It's still a really volatile situation, though.
Okay, so for all of you e-commerce entrepreneurs out there listening, why should you care about this? What's the bottom line?
Simply put, it's going to cost you more to get your products into the U.S. and to sell your stuff overseas.
Makes sense.
And this translates to a whole bunch of challenges for e-commerce brands.
Like what? Give us the nitty-gritty.
Well, for starters, your profit margins are going to get squeezed because your costs are going up and you can't always pass that on to your customer. Then you've got inventory and cash flow issues to worry about because you might need more money up front to cover these tariffs. And selling internationally just got a whole lot trickier with potential customs delays and higher costs for your international buyers.
And I'm guessing all the behind-the-scenes work has multiplied, too.
You betcha you're going to have to be even more meticulous with your HS codes.
Those universal product codes for international trade?
Exactly, and those country of origin labels need to be perfect.
Absolutely.
And maybe the scariest thing is the risk of losing customers when they get slapped with unexpected duty fees upon delivery.
Ouch, nobody likes that.
No, but...
So this is a pretty big upheaval.
Yeah, it is.
And in this deep dive, we're going to cut through the noise and give you some actionable strategies to help you weather this tariff storm.
I like that, weather the tariff storm.
What are some things that e-commerce brands can do right now to get ahead of this thing?
Well, one big trend we're seeing is a move towards DDP shipping for international sales.
DDP. Break that down for us. What does that even mean for the seller and the customer?
So DDP stands for Delivered Duty Paid.
Okay.
And it means that the seller takes care of all the import duties, taxes, and customs clearance before the goods reach the buyer.
So it's all baked into the price up front.
Exactly. The customer sees the full cost at checkout.
Gotcha. And how is that different from the way things are normally done?
Well, the traditional way is DDU, Delivered Duty Unpaid, where the buyer gets hit with those extra fees when the package arrives.
Right. And nobody likes that.
It's a nasty surprise.
So why is DDP becoming so important now?
Well, it creates a much better customer experience. Nobody's happy about surprise fees, and those often lead to abandoned carts and bad reviews.
Right.
By offering DDP, you eliminate that frustration, and you get happier customers.
I like happy customers.
Me too.
Yeah.
And you also avoid the hassle of dealing with refused shipments.
Yeah, those are no fun.
Not at all. Plus, by handling the customs yourself, you can often streamline the process and avoid delays.
So smoother sailing all around.
Exactly. And platforms like Shippo are big proponents of DDP.
Okay.
And they support it through major carriers like UPS, FedEx, DHL Express, and even Canada Post.
So that's one big piece of the puzzle.
Yep.
But where should e-commerce brands start when it comes to rethinking their overall approach?
Well, a good place to start is your sourcing strategy.
Your suppliers, basically.
Exactly. You really need to take a hard look at where your products are coming from.
Okay, so what are some concrete things businesses can do?
Diversification is key.
Meaning?
Look for suppliers in countries with more favorable tariff rates.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket?
Exactly. For instance, goods from India currently face a 26% tariff,
Okay.
which is still significant, but a lot less painful than the 145% on Chinese goods.
I see your point.
And don't forget about the USMCA agreement with Mexico and Canada.
Right.
That can mean zero tariffs, but you have to meet the rules of origin.
What are those?
They determine if a product truly qualifies as originating in a USMCA country.
Even if some parts come from elsewhere.
Exactly. It's not just about where the final assembly happens.
So you really need to understand your supply chain.
Got it? And it's a good idea to talk to trade compliance experts to make sure you're doing everything right.
Makes sense.
Another option, though it's a bigger change, is to consider bringing some manufacturing back to the U.S.
So domestic production.
Yeah, that eliminates import tariffs altogether, and it can shorten your supply chains.
But I imagine there are downsides too.
Of course, labor costs are generally higher in the U.S., and there's the initial investment to set everything up.
Right. So it's a trade-off.
Exactly. You have to weigh the pros and cons.
What about looking at countries that are geographically closer to the U.S.?
That's another good strategy. Nearshoring to Mexico, for example, is becoming very popular.
Why is that?
Well, it can give you more agile supply chains and lower transportation costs compared to manufacturing in Asia.
Makes sense.
And you might still find more competitive labor costs than in the U.S.
So it's kind of a middle ground.
Yeah, but of course you need to do your homework on potential locations.
Right. Make sure they're stable and reliable.
Absolutely.
So besides the source of their goods, what else can e-commerce brands do?
Inventory management becomes really crucial in this environment.
How so?
Some businesses might have stocked up on inventory before these tariffs hit.
To get ahead of the price increases?
Exactly. Yeah, but for others, especially those dealing with non-perishable, high-margin items that are really affected by tariffs,
Okay.
it might be worth considering stockpiling some inventory during this 90-day window.
Especially if you're worried about further trade restrictions down the line.
Right, but it's a delicate balance.
You don't want to get stuck with too much inventory.
Exactly. If things change again,
Oh.
you don't want to be left holding the bag.
So what's the alternative?
Well, if you have limited capital or storage space, it might be smarter to streamline your product offerings.
Focus on your best sellers.
Exactly. And maybe even discontinue some of the less profitable items.
The ones where the tariffs just make them too expensive.
Exactly. Even small tweaks to your inventory can give you some financial breathing room.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about sourcing and inventory.
Right.
What about pricing? How do you handle that in this crazy new world?
Yeah, pricing is a tough one. There are no easy answers.
I imagine you have to raise prices to some extent.
You probably will, but you have to be strategic about it. You might choose to raise prices selectively on the items most affected by tariffs.
Okay.
But if you do that, you need to be transparent with your customers.
Explain why the prices are going up.
Exactly. You need to maintain their trust.
Absolutely.
Another option is to incorporate those extra costs into your shipping fees or the base price of the item.
So it's not a separate line item at checkout.
Exactly. Nobody likes those surprise charges.
Right. It feels sneaky.
Exactly. So it's all about creating a good user experience.
And you also mentioned dynamic pricing earlier.
Yeah, that can be really helpful.
Remind us what that is.
Basically, it means adjusting your prices based on market conditions and what your competitors are doing.
So you stay competitive.
Exactly. And it's also a good idea to just add a brief explanation at checkout.
About the tariffs?
Yeah, just a sentence or two explaining that the new trade tariffs have led to higher costs.
So customers understand what's going on.
Exactly. It goes a long way in building goodwill.
Now, are there any legitimate ways for businesses to reduce or postpone paying these tariffs?
Yes, there are a few trade and customs programs that can be really helpful.
Like what?
Well, there's something called duty drawback.
Duty drawback.
Yeah, it allows you to potentially reclaim up to 99% of the tariffs you paid.
Wow, 99%.
Yeah, if you re-export those goods or use them to make products that are then exported.
Interesting.
Then there are foreign trade zones, or FTZs.
FTZs, okay.
These are basically designated areas within the U.S. where you can store, process, or assemble imported goods without paying duties.
Until they actually enter the U.S. market.
Exactly. Think of it like a duty-free holding area.
So you can defer those payments.
Exactly, which can be a huge boost to your cash flow.
That makes sense.
And of course, you always want to take advantage of free trade agreements like USMCA whenever possible.
Right.
But remember, those rules of origin are key.
Got to qualify for those preferential rates.
Exactly. And speaking of qualifying, it's crucial to understand the changes to the de minimis rules.
Okay.
Now that the exemption is gone for shipments under $800 from China and Hong Kong,
Right.
you need to be super careful about how you route your shipments.
And make sure you're declaring the country of origin accurately.
Exactly. Trying to get around these rules can lead to some hefty fines.
So no funny business.
Right. It's best to consult with a customs broker or a trade advisor to make sure you're on the right side of the law.
Sounds like a good investment.
It is.
Okay, so we've covered sourcing, inventory pricing, and even some legal loopholes.
Loopholes.
What? Ways to minimize the impact.
Right.
What about logistics and fulfillment? Do those strategies need to change too?
Absolutely. We already talked about DDP shipping.
Right.
But brands are also looking at some more fundamental changes to their fulfillment models.
Like what?
Well, setting up regional warehouses is becoming more and more popular.
Okay.
For example, you could import your goods in bulk to a warehouse in the U.S. and then fulfill individual orders domestically.
So you're not shipping individual packages across borders.
Exactly, which can save you a lot of money in the long run.
Uh,
Some brands are even experimenting with fulfillment operations in Canada, Mexico, or the EU.
to avoid those retaliatory tariffs.
Exactly. It's all about finding ways to mitigate the impact.
Makes sense. And what about drop shipping? Is that still a viable option?
It depends. For some businesses, it might make more sense to switch to a model where they import in larger quantities and then reship domestically.
So they have more control over the process.
Exactly, and over the customer experience.
Okay, so it sounds like communication is key throughout all of this.
It is. You need to be talking to your customers and your suppliers.
What should you be telling your customers?
Well, if you're raising prices, explain why.
Transparency is key.
Absolutely. And also let them know about any changes you're making to your supply chain.
Give them a peek behind the curtain.
Exactly. And set clear expectations about shipping times and any potential duties or delays.
So no surprises.
Right. Communication is all about building trust and loyalty.
And what about talking to your suppliers?
Well, you might be surprised what you can achieve with an open and honest conversation.
How so?
Your suppliers are also feeling the pinch from these tariffs,
Right.
and they might be willing to work with you, especially if you're a big customer.
So maybe they could absorb some of the cost increases.
Exactly. Or you might be able to renegotiate pricing or payment terms.
It's worth a shot.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different strategies.
We have.
But how can technology help e-commerce businesses navigate all of this?
Technology is essential these days. You can't do it all manually.
So what kind of tools are we talking about?
Well, duty and tax calculators are becoming increasingly popular.
What do those do?
They allow you to give customers accurate landed cost estimates at checkout.
So no sticker shock?
Exactly. And AI-powered HS code classification tools are also crucial.
What are those all about?
They help you ensure that your customs declarations are accurate.
Okay.
They use AI to analyze product descriptions and trade regulations and assign the correct HS codes.
So you avoid errors and audits.
Exactly. And forecasting tools can help you model different pricing scenarios.
So you can make informed decisions.
Exactly. And then there are integrated dashboards that give you a complete view of all your duties, taxes, and landed costs.
So you can track everything in one place.
Exactly. And finally, carrier integrations are really important.
Okay.
They automate customs declarations and prepayment of duties and ensure real-time compliance.
So they streamline the whole shipping process.
Exactly. The businesses that embrace these technologies will have a huge advantage in this new environment.
So it sounds like the entire landscape of e-commerce, logistics, and shipping is changing dramatically.
It is. It's a whole new ballgame.
And how are carriers and platforms adapting to this?
Well, platforms like Shopify are integrating duty calculation features right into their checkout flows.
Okay.
And third-party logistics providers are emphasizing the benefits of using foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses.
To defer those tariff payments.
Exactly. And even marketplaces like Etsy are addressing country of origin labeling requirements.
To help their sellers stay compliant.
Exactly. And it's worth mentioning the specific duty rate changes for goods shipped through the International Postal Network from China and Hong Kong.
Okay.
Starting May 2nd, 2025, it's 30% of the item's value, or $25, whichever is higher.
Okay.
And that rate increases to 30% or $50 starting June 1st, 2025.
So shipping from China and Hong Kong is getting a lot more expensive.
It is. Cross-border shipping in general is becoming more complex, more expensive, and requires a much more strategic approach.
So for all those e-commerce brands out there who are probably feeling a bit overwhelmed by all of this,
I can imagine.
what's the main takeaway? Where should they even begin?
I think the most important thing is to focus on the things you can control.
Okay.
Adapting to these tariffs is going to be a process of continuous improvement.
So take it one step at a time.
Exactly. Start by exploring smarter sourcing options.
Okay.
Make sure you understand your current shipping costs.
Right.
And communicate those costs clearly to your customers.
Transparency is key.
It is. And look for ways to reduce friction in your logistics setup. And finally, make sure all your teams are on the same page about how these tariffs are affecting your business.
So get everyone aligned.
Exactly. If you take small, focused steps, you can navigate this new terrain successfully.
That's really helpful advice.
Glad to hear it.
Now, all this talk about a changing global trade environment makes me wonder,
What's that?
what kind of crazy new partnerships or innovations might pop up in the e-commerce world in the coming years?
Interesting question.
You know, things that could fundamentally reshape how supply chains work and how customers experience online shopping.
Yeah, it's fun to think about what the future holds.
Lots of food for thought.